Hey everybody. I was asked an excellent question yesterday, and that is, how often should I do water changes on my aquarium? And I really wish I could give you an excellent answer, but that is one of those impossible to answer questions. So today we're actually going to have a conversation about how often should I do a water change on my aquarium. This is sort of stemming from the fact that I shot a video the other day where I talked about nitrate and how nitrate is not nearly as toxic to your fish as the aquarium hobby industry would like you to believe. And there's speculation as to whether or not this encourages people to do water changes more frequently than they need to, etc. And so the $64,000 question is, how often should I do a water change? And again, there's no real cut and dry answer I can give you. But I want to start with what we see most frequently as the sort of generalized guideline to doing water changes, and sort of where that comes from and why we always see this 10% weekly and 25% monthly. You'll see those numbers almost everywhere. You go to any pet store and you pick up one of those little "so you want to start an aquarium" pamphlets, and you're going to see 10% weekly, 25% monthly water changes. And where that comes from is nowhere really specific that I can determine. But imagine, if you will, that I own a fish store and I'm a shopkeeper and I'm in there fielding questions from customers all day. And I'm not going to ask you to imagine the kinds of questions I have to answer all day, but imagine having to answer the "how often should I do a water change" question. Now, I'm a busy shopkeeper. I got stuff to do, other customers to worry about, things going on in the store. I do not have a week to sit there and ask 7,000 questions about their tap water and their substrate and how often they feed and what kind of food they use and how stocked their tank is and whether it's planted and what kind of filtration they have, and on and on and on, to determine how often that tank needs to be water changed. So we sort of set up these basic beginner, like, if you're just learning and getting your feet under you, then here, do this. And when you've got that down, then we can have a little more in-depth conversation. And those beginner type things that we always see are the inch of fish per gallon of water rule. It's all the stuff you see in all those "so you want to set up your first aquarium" type pamphlets or web pages or whatever. And those are all good, foundational, get your foot in the door, learn how to keep a functional fish tank going, and if you can follow those rules, then we can move on to slightly more advanced stuff. So as this imaginary shopkeeper, I have to assume that if you're asking me how often should I do a water change, you're probably still in that sort of beginner category, and I'm going to have to assume, for practical reasons, that you're also sort of following these beginner guidelines. And therefore, without knowing anything about your tap water, you might have really hard tap water, but you condition it and now it's softer in your tank, and I don't know. I have no idea what's going on with your water. But a 10% water change is not going to shift anything too radically. And if it's not an overstocked tank and you're doing kind of what you should, that should be fine. If you're a little more advanced than that, then you're probably going to have a little more understanding of when you should do water changes. But it's still a really good question for people that are more advanced, because if we're not going to go by 40 parts per million nitrate, or we gotta maintain this mythical 20 parts per million nitrate in our tank for some reason. But if we've got a more advanced tank where, say, the nitrate is being absorbed by the plants and you don't have a lot of nitrate buildup, what do you go by? How do you know when to do a water change if the nitrate isn't that sort of proxy measurement that you can use? I always talk about checking the nitrate in a very simple beginner sort of tank is just a good way to keep an eye on what's going on in the tank. But if you've got a more advanced tank where the nitrate isn't doing the same thing that the other stuff is doing, how do you know? And the answer, of course, is you test your water, and you test it for whatever parameters you need to test it for. If there's a reason to believe that your pH is dropping over time, you'll have to keep an eye on your pH. And if you see it beginning to shift, you can do whatever amounts of water changes or adjustments you need to do to keep it stable. Likewise with your water hardness will change over time. It doesn't just stay static in your tank. If you've got 15 degrees hardness, as picking a random number. You know, when you put that in your aquarium, if you've got tannin and tannic acid in your tank, plus the CO2 that's in the tank from the fish, over time, those minerals change and can be depleted. Your carbonates get sort of used up by the acids, and the acid reacts with the carbonates, and your alkalinity can be depleted, because carbonates are your alkalinity. And again, there's so many things going on in the fish tank that you need to have a good understanding of all this stuff, and that's why these are more advanced systems. And there's the basic beginner setup kind of stuff, and then once you get into this more advanced stuff, it requires a little bit more of a conversation. Easy ways that you can know to do water changes without even testing your water. Some of the ways that I know it's time to do a water change is if I say, it's been a while since I've done a water change. I don't really remember when the last time I did a water change in that tank is. That's a good time to do a water change. If it's just been that long, just go ahead and do a water change. If you're familiar with your own water and what's happening in your tank, you can do whatever size water change you want. I usually do big ones when I get around to doing them. I do them fairly infrequently, but when I do change the water, I make it count, because I know I'm not really shifting my water that much. The water that comes out of my tap is very similar to what's in my tank. If I'm going to do a huge water change, I'll check a couple of parameters first, just to make sure I'm not doing anything that's going to shift anything too hard. I don't want to throw the pH too, radically one way or the other. And you get familiar with your tanks over time. So another way I can do it is I can see algal growth and stuff all over the glass, and maybe rather than just getting in there with my arm and wiping it down, throw a hose in there and drain some water out of it while I'm wiping it down and make a water change out of it. And so that's when I can do a water change. If I notice mold and detritus and stuff is starting to build up in the corners, and I can just visually see that the tank's getting dirty, I can get in there and do a water change because of that. And then of course, testing. I can't stress enough that the only way you can tell what's going on with your water as far as pH shift or hardness shift or your alkalinity changing or you have to test it. You can't just look and see what your pH is or see whether there's any ammonia built up in your tank. Now you shouldn't, and I'm just assuming that if everything's functioning even remotely close to normal, you should have zero ammonia and you should have zero nitrate. But the nitrate is more or less irrelevant. So those are just some basic ideas and some basic thoughts on when to do water changes once you get beyond that sort of basic beginner setup of I'm going to do 10% weekly and 25% monthly. And even then, that's only just a general guideline. It doesn't necessarily apply to every single tank out there. There's a lot of tanks that maybe, I know it's a tendency for a lot of beginner fish keepers, myself included. When I was a beginner fish keeper, I really, really heavily stocked my tanks. I used to joke about needing a crowbar and a stick of butter to get another fish in one of my tanks. And so if you've got a really heavily stocked tank, that 10%, 25% might not really cut it. You may still be getting a lot of organic waste buildup and hormone buildup, and an overstocked tank, the fish are going to be stressed, and so you're going to get stress hormones building up in the tank. An overstocked tank needs different kind of maintenance than a lightly or regularly stocked tank, I'll call it, for whatever that value is worth. And we can have a conversation about that too, the whole inch of fish per gallon of water and what is overstocked versus heavily stocked, etc. So that'll be a good topic for conversation. Maybe that'll be Sunday night's live stream discussion. I couldn't think of what it was called for a minute there, but I do a Sunday night live stream at 8 o'clock and I do a Friday night live stream at 8 o'clock. Friday night is open chat. Sunday night is a topic discussion, so maybe that'll be this week's topic discussion, so tune in for that. And make sure you're subscribed and ring that bell. You never know when you're going to get a live stream spur of the moment from me or any other type of video, and you don't want to miss it. So if you've rung that bell, you won't. So thanks for watching. See you real soon in the next one.